in about 40 minutes.
I talk faster.
So everyone, let me introduce Eddie Friel, who is calling us from Scotland and is originally from Northern Ireland and has spent his entire career in the tourism business. And he's going to relate to us a couple of tales of his career and his exploits and some of his guidance going forward. So Eddie, please take it away.
Well, hello, everybody. It's good afternoon to you, I suppose. It's good evening to me. I am delighted and honored to be associated with your university. I have a friend to thank for that. Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome.
And yes, it would be preferable if I could be with the students in the classroom and able to talk to them individually. That would be the preferred option. My big difficulty is that I prefer to walk around the room and talk to each individually, and talking at them through this medium is not the most satisfactory. But despite that, my first thing I have to say to you is that being Northern Irish, I talk funny. They are very funny. We tend to speak very quickly, and I will try to control myself and my accent so that you're able to understand me fully. The first thing I would like to say to you, and I want to see now how well we can actually pull up some of the technology that we're playing with here. Share screen. Get this right.
What's my hair doing?
Sorry?
I'm just talking to myself.
Okay. No better person. Trying to get this PowerPoint presentation.
There we go.
Okay. Now we're in good shape.
There it is.
Sorry?
It's up.
That's okay. What I would like to do now is, from the student's point of view, I would like to tell them a story first. And I would like to ask, first of all, is there such a thing as a tourism industry? And ultimately, why should you care? At this point, I would like to tell you a story. And this is a story about Northern Ireland, where I was working in the Northern Ireland Tourist Board. And at that time, Northern Ireland was not a particularly happy place. There was what people called the Troubles. And one of the most troubled places was the Europa Hotel in Belfast. And I was staying in that hotel when a bomb went off. There was a bomb scare. We had 15 minutes to leave the hotel. When I left the hotel, the issue was, how long have you got before the bomb goes off? We had 15 minutes when a 1,500-pound bomb went off. It shattered everything within 4 blocks. There wasn't a pane of glass left in the hotel, and many buildings were damaged. 24 motor cars were destroyed, and one was plastered up the wall of the Opera House as if it had been painted on. I walked through the streets of Belfast until the following morning when I went into my office. And the phone rang, and it was the receptionist of the Europa Hotel. And she said, "Mr. Friel, have you anywhere to stay tonight?" And I said, "No, I wasn't thinking about it." And she said, "Will we have your room ready?" I said, "What do you mean you have my room ready? The place is destroyed." And she said, "Well, we've got it ready. You don't have to stay there, but would you like to come over and have a look?" And I said, "Yes, of course." Rubble all around the reception area, absolute mess. I was taken up to what was my suite. The sitting room area was closed, and only the sleeping area was available. The bed was beautifully made. An electric fire was plugged in because there was no heating available. There was a bowl of fruit sitting on the table, and there was a note on a card. And on the note it said, "Mr. Friel, please don't walk on the carpet because we don't think we have gathered up all the glass." And there were 2 young receptionists and 1 hotel porter between 18 and 20 years of age. And they said to me, "What do you think? What do you think?" And I said, "There is nowhere else I would rather stay." The following morning, I went down into the reception area, and those 3 young people were still there. Only the receptionists were trying to clean up the mess, and the hall porter was putting boards in the window, and on spray paint, he was saying, "Business as usual." What were those young people saying to me? They said, "No one has the right to take away our aspiration to have a better quality of life. Nobody has the right to take away the dignity of work in the jobs that we have. Nobody has the right to tell us we can't." And that experience is what I want to say to the young people who are now studying tourism. No one has the right to prevent you from aspiring to be the best you can be with the talents that you have. Nobody should say to you, you can't. The only reason why you can't, and the only obstacles that exist, are those that you place in front of yourself. This industry, where you start, has nothing to do with where you finish. I started as a bartender in one of the poorest places in Northern Ireland. And if anyone had said I would have had the career that I have had, I simply would not have believed them. So remember, where you start has nothing whatsoever to do with where you finish. I think the issue of your brand, if you like, which I very much like, the whole question of driven by doing. That could have been my basic job description, because it's about driven by doing the right things right. You can do the right things wrong, or you can do the wrong things right, but getting the right things right is extremely important. Excuse me. I'm trying to bring up the full screen without the, are you seeing full screen, or are you seeing everything on the side? What are you seeing there, Ron?
I just see all the little, yes, I
It's
can
not
see that.
actually in full screen mode.
Yes, yes.
Ready?
It's okay though.
Yeah, it's fine, Eddie.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So is there such a thing as a tourism industry? Why should we care? We know why we should care. It's about generating wealth and creating jobs and building bridges of opportunity between those jobs and the people who are denied access to them. It's an economic activity that should not exist in isolation from the economy of the community it serves. What does that mean? Well, fundamentally, tourism is not an end in itself, but rather a means to an end. Improving the quality of life for residents and visitors alike, generating wealth and creating jobs, and building those bridges of opportunity between the jobs created and those people denied access to them. It's all about the place in the global 21st century knowledge economy. What is the unit of analysis of economic performance? And how do we describe the world as it is, as opposed to our view of what it should be? It's important for us, in terms of our students, as senior people in the industry, to try to explain to them the world as it is, and to try to give them the kind of information and the kind of systems and processes that they need to take informed decisions. One of the most significant developments towards the end of the 20th century and continuing today is the movement of populations from rural areas to urban centers. For the first time in the history of mankind since the year 2000, the majority of the world's population is living in urban centers. The United Nations predicts that by 2030, 60% of the world's population will be living in urban centers. China is planning to build 285 at what it describes as eco-cities. McKinsey estimates that India's urban population will grow from 340 million in 2008 to 590 million in 2030. So a long time ago, Aristotle said that the partnership finally composed of several villages is the city-state. It has at last attained the limit of virtually complete self-sufficiency, and thus while it comes into existence for the sake of life, it exists for the good life. So are we returning to the era of the old European city-states? Well, perhaps not. But the distinction between cities and every other form of political or geographic organization is that they form naturally. Cities are organic. Whereas armies create empires, politicians found nations, legislators create boundaries, it is usually commerce that creates and sustains cities. As empires and nations come and go, some even in the past decade, cities, with exceptions, endure. They may be helped or damaged by government, but they are not the creatures of government. What does that mean? They are not the creatures of government. Let me give you an example. Niagara Falls, where I worked for some 9 years. When I arrived there and I wanted to know what the scale of tourism was and how they organized it, I discovered that Niagara Falls, New York, had turned their back on tourism and used the cataract to generate cheap power for industry. Those industries then left their detritus when they left Niagara Falls and left social deprivation, poverty, and an appalling state of the city of Niagara Falls. It lost 52% of its population in a very short space of time. They were not remotely interested in tourism and decided they would leave that to Niagara Falls, Ontario. Tourism was of no interest whatsoever. The government locally did not have the infrastructure in place, were not interested in having it in place, and ultimately, when I arrived, 52% of the population were living in poverty. that is an affront to any civilized society. But to turn your back on one of the 7 wonders of the world was really quite a decision. So governments can influence, of course they can, but ultimately, if the city administration is such, and if the leadership within that city has the ability to be able to design a future which is about improving the quality of life by using tourism as a driver of that economy and utilizing the assets of one of the 7 wonders of the world to do so, failing to do so was one of those examples of government not being able to help. The other issue was that the political structures between the regional bodies, no one talked to one another. No one talked to the industry. Niagara University Hotel School, because the city was not interested in tourism, had to choose international connections rather than local connections. So it is possible for governments to either help or get in the way. So there are issues about how does a city work. The city region will now be the unit of analysis of economic performance in the early part of the 21st century, and there is plenty of evidence to support that decision. So what is the role of a place marketing development organization? What is the justification for an intervention in the transaction between the supplier and the customer? What does it mean to be the custodian of the brand of the destination? The United Nations World Tourism Organization defines a tourist as any person spending 24 hours or more away from their normal place of residence. What are the key criteria for successful tourism development? Well, when I arrived in Glasgow and I had a blank sheet of paper and I was asked to set up a destination marketing organization for the city, the issue was there had never been a destination marketing organization or a tourism industry in place. So I had to ask myself the question, what would be, for me, looking at it from a customer perspective, the key criteria for successful tourism development? The perception of the destination in key markets. That's about reputation management, but it's about how does a customer see you? What is the perception of your destination? Northern Ireland was considered to be a war zone. I was appointed to be Director North America, or USA and Canada, as Canada prefers. But I was asked to be the Director of Northern Ireland Tourist Board in the United States, based in New York, when 100% of media attention was describing a war zone. My job was to create customers from the United States and Canada to go to a place which was perceived as being a war zone. Glasgow was perceived as being a violent, dirty, industrial slum, where the National Tourist Board didn't even have the name of the city appear anywhere in their literature or their promotion material. They were apologizing for the fact that city was such an awful place that it didn't deserve to be in their promotional literature. When Northern Ireland Tourist Board asked me to go to Glasgow as their director in Scotland, they said to me first, well, I know you have a family, so you better go there for a week to see if you'd be prepared to have your family live there. 5 a day were going off in Belfast, and I was being asked, would I be safe going to Glasgow? This is what we mean by the perception of a destination. The other issue is you need a reason to go there. If the definition of the UNWTO is anyone who stays 24 hours or more beyond their place of residence, then you have to have somewhere to stay. In terms of a reason or a purpose to visit, in Glasgow 1983, which is a while ago, the definition of a tourist in that city was somebody who was lost. I'm glad you're there, Ron. And most of the people, 98% of all tourism to Scotland came up the main artery, which was the M74. They went to Edinburgh and the Highlands, and we did not have a reason at all to bring them off the M74 because we had never been a tourism destination. We had an information centre which was run by the city council, which gave people information on how to get out of the city. They never got in.
It's like a stand-up routine.
Well, better believe it. The other issue was, how do you get there? How good is the access? Well, Glasgow in 1983 did not have any direct international or transatlantic airline traffic. Government decided that all American airlines who wished to fly to Scotland needed to go to Prestwick Airport. Prestwick Airport is a good hour at least from Glasgow, and only 2 airlines wanted to fly there, and they were charters. There were no national carriers interested in flying to Prestwick, but they did want to fly to Glasgow. Glasgow Airport is 15 minutes from the city centre. However, we had a little problem. Government policy, and the government at the time was Margaret Thatcher's government, and her Secretary of State lived in Prestwick area.
Yeah.
That's why Prestwick Airport was the designated airport. I had to persuade Margaret Thatcher that governments did not decide where airlines fly. Passengers did. And eventually, after 3 years of really working extremely hard, I managed to persuade Mrs. Thatcher. And when I said to her, Prime Minister, governments do not decide where passengers fly, passengers do. She said, you're quite right. And within 2 weeks, she had changed the policy, despite the fact that her Secretary of State was in Prestwick. And that was a very brave political decision and an example of how governments can really help. A range of accommodation stock. Well, Glasgow back then had only got 2 hotels. So you're not in the major tourism industry. Also, you had a lot of guest houses and the quality was pretty appalling. And in terms of quality of service, that was something that happened elsewhere. In terms of trying to make it easy for the customer to buy, we put so many barriers in the way that nobody was coming. And you needed qualified, trained staff to manage and grow the business. Well, that was a basic set of criteria which you measure your destination against. But the problem is, it doesn't matter what your destination is like today. You have to create customers today. You cannot wait until you're ready. You cannot wait until you're perfect. You're never going to be. But instead, you have to deal with what you've got. So if we could not offer an appeal to any of the British tourists coming up the M74, how can we find a customer today for what we have got? Well, that required us to look at in greater depth, what do we have? And we started that audit, that destination audit. And we established that Glasgow had Scottish Opera, Scottish Ballet, Scottish National Orchestra, It had the greatest range of cultural and artistic provision of any city in the UK outside of London. It had a fantastic set of museums. It had Charles Rennie Mackintosh, who was one of the greatest designers of the 20th century. And at the turn of the century, he created something known as the Glasgow style. So there was this rich cultural provision. The only
And
problem,
and the best university in Scotland.
we had 3 universities.
Yeah,
And those
the best
universities,
one.
Glasgow particularly, which was the oldest, Glasgow University had 3 teaching hospitals. And the research that takes place there is world-renowned in a variety of disciplines. So why were we apologizing? We had quite enough reasons for people to come, but we were also a major retail destination with traditional Scottish shops with major reputations. And again, nobody knew about it. So our challenge was, how do we find a customer for these things that we had available already? And looking at access transport, Iceland Air were flying daily flights into Glasgow Airport. They had spare capacity at weekends because commercial traffic was filling what little hotels we had Monday through Thursday, but weekends were empty. So we decided to sell the notion of retailing the arts, football, sport. We treated Glasgow as if it were Las Vegas, and we went to Iceland, proposing that they visit Glasgow as a major shopping and so many things to do. With Iceland Air, with a tour operator in Iceland, and we produced all of our promotional material in the Icelandic language, because I have a fundamental belief that you can buy in English, but you must sell in the customer's language. And we have always adhered to that particular principle. Within 1 year, we had more visitors from Iceland coming to Glasgow to shop than all of the visitors coming to Scotland in total. It was just, how do you find a customer for what you currently have? And how can you look at the criteria which emerged as we were going through this process to make that work, to form the partnerships, to have the associations with the people that are able to assist you in producing a customer for the place. It was a fascinating thing to happen, because if we started out as a place where a tourist is lost, to go to a place where suddenly local people are beginning to look and say, who are all these foreigners who are walking about in the shops and so forth? But the retailers loved it. So the issue of creating a customer for the place is, you don't have a choice or the luxury of waiting until you're ready. You're never going to be ready, because you're growing the destination all the time, and you're trying to match your destination with where you can find a market for what you have today. As you grow that destination and you grow your customer base, then you can spread into different sectors in order to be able to grow the destination in terms of the infrastructure that you need, and to grow your customers in order to generate wealth and create jobs, and then set up the training and the education systems that you need in order to have the service quality that you need to deliver. The Rust Belt in particular looks likely to shed vast numbers of jobs, and some of its cities and towns, from Cleveland to St. Louis to Buffalo to Detroit, will have a hard time recovering. Thank you, Professor Richard Florida. Sorry, but if we all believe that, we would never go to work. Buffalo suffered exactly the same history as Glasgow. It lost its traditional industries and was left with appalling poverty, social deprivation, and 2/3 drop in their population. That had a horrendous impact on their tax base. And Buffalo started apologizing for itself. The issue about how does a city reclaim its identity? How can you return a city back to its citizens as a place of which you can be proud, rather than a city which you apologize for? We get these things like some cities like Buffalo and Detroit should be left just to die a natural economic death. Well, that's very helpful. If the cities don't make it, America is going down the tubes. We have a right to demand what our people deserve. Oh, really? The cities have problems we cannot solve ourselves. Then why are you there? Tin cup urbanism decried by Norquist. John Norquist was the former mayor of Milwaukee and has written a book on the wealth of cities about his experience as a 3-time mayor of Milwaukee. I would recommend that book to anybody who is interested in the future of cities. The tired ideology of urban dependency let cities off the hook completely for fixing their problems. Glasgow, the Glasgow experience. How do you move from a city which has appalling poverty to this, which is exactly the same site? Creating customers for a place. What does the place look like? Well, we are not in the business of marketing individual units in the supply chain. When people talk about industry, they will talk about an accommodation industry, a hotel industry, an airline industry, a visitor attraction industry, an arts and cultural industry. But they don't talk really about a tourism industry. Tourism is about place, and each place has different elements within the supply chain. I apologize for this slide. It's very dense and it breaks every rule in PowerPoint. But the point is that to see your place in terms of what are all of the elements, and this is not meant to be in any way completely comprehensive, but it gives you the sense of where you go from tourism supply chain to whether it's your attractions and all of that. How do you manage the individual component parts of your destination? What information does your destination owe you? And what information do you owe your destination? The answer to that is they owe you the information about performance. That's about occupancy levels of hotels. That's about seat sales in theaters. That's about bed nights. That's about airline seats. What capacity do you have available to sell at any one given time during your tourism year? There are different periods where you have you're busy and you're doing very well, and other periods when you're not doing well. What the tourism destination marketing needs to know is what do you have available and when do you not have availability? And then they will position the destination, instead of wandering around with a bag of solutions in search of a problem, they will be addressing the issues that are happening on a daily basis within the industry. And technology today allows you to be able to monitor every single solitary sector of your industry to the perfect degree that you need in order to inform marketing decision making. Then you come to all of that represented by a destination brand. As far as Glasgow is concerned, it started with a museum. In 1983, Her Majesty the Queen opened the Burrell Collection. In its first year, it had over 1 million visitors. Suddenly, I had a platform on which I could build the stories of the history, heritage, and culture of the city of Glasgow using the cultural industries and this museum, which was a private collection from a successful shipbuilder and which gave Glasgow an enormous foundation on which to build a tourism industry. Of course, the immediate response of the press was, shouldn't it be in Edinburgh? What's it doing in Glasgow? It's a violent, dirty industrial slum. That image or perception needed to be changed. And the way to challenge it was using the cultural industries of which we had enormous rich provision. Eventually, by inviting the media to visit this museum and to discover the new Glasgow that was emerging through regeneration policies, started to produce the kind of headlines that we needed to achieve. We had, although such a reputation which was so negative, we decided we would have to pursue an event-led strategy. But if the event was good enough, they would come. Pity it wasn't Glasgow, but if the event's good enough, fine. So we bid to host the 1988 Garden Festival in the city of Glasgow. The Garden Festival was a national government policy attempt at trying to improve derelict land in inner cities for future development. And that Garden Festival site is now that. So on the back of a museum, we managed to attract the Garden Festival site. But that wasn't enough. Before the Garden Festival even took place, we had the opportunity to bid to become the cultural capital of Europe. I got a phone call and said, Eddie, what would you say if we told you Glasgow had the opportunity to become the cultural capital of Europe? I said, I don't know what it is, but I'll have it. And they said, well, you've got 4 days. What do you mean I've got 4 days? Well, it's been sitting on the local authority's desk for 4 months, and their response has been, oh, that's way out of Glasgow's league. If your administration cannot believe in its own city, how appalling is that? So with 4 days, we managed to put together a bid. We said that you shouldn't bid to be a cultural capital of Europe unless you already were a cultural city. You shouldn't bid for it if you couldn't market it, because up until now, nobody had ever heard of the designation in the first place. And if we won it, we would add value to the designation because we already had secured 4 million in sponsorship for our garden festival, which hadn't taken place yet, and that we would be able to fund our proposals. But finally, you had to have something unique that no other city could claim. We claimed that we were the first city in Europe to pursue a policy of urban regeneration using the arts and cultural industries as the driver. And that if we were successful, then we would be able to advise other cities to some degree about how you go about the regeneration process. And what happened as a consequence was we delivered the most successful European City of Culture ever. It was an incredible thing for the city itself, who had been apologizing for itself, to give the city back within such a short space of time to its citizens, to be proud of, we are the cultural capital of Europe. You can no longer describe us as an industrial, violent, dirty slum.
Eddie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a few minutes, just a few minutes left for you to sum up, if that's possible.
I'll sum up with in terms of the perception, we launched a new brand and we had to see what other people were saying about us, because we wanted to try and develop an overall umbrella which would position us properly, rather than industrial slum and all the other negative things we were getting and what we were looking at in terms of the American media response. In Style magazine, think Manhattan with a Scottish accent. UK's hippest and most happening city, brimming with style and culture, Scotland's biggest city is a revelation. If there's an inspirational spirit looming over the city's renaissance, it's Macintosh. Macintosh was the designer at the turn of the century and who influenced design. He built a school of art, designed the school of art, a house for an art lover, and we produced the slogan of Glasgow, Scotland with style. We then needed to bring that message to a completely different audience, but we had to use both this kind of advertising, the first of which was ever used for destination marketing. And I had about 300 magazines who used that ad simply because they liked the ad, which I didn't have to pay for. But you have to have your local people support. And we had, he's a truck driver, she's a student, she's a housewife, he's an architect, she's a nurse. We went to the hotel industry. The launch of Glasgow, Scotland with style gave us an umbrella to brag about the city alongside marketing and our individual businesses. Retailing, events, conventions. Glasgow with Style ran for 10 years and was the most successful campaign that the city ever ran. It created an industry that didn't exist within 18 years. That industry today employs twice as many people as ever worked in Clydeside in its heyday as a shipbuilding center. So don't let anybody tell you that tourism is not a real industry, that it doesn't create proper jobs, because with the expansion of cities in the future, the number of jobs that are going to be available for you students is enormous. The scale of the opportunity for you is beyond describing. So for you to be told you can't do something, yes, you can. And that description that I've given you of the world as expanding cities, creating jobs for you, what you have to decide is what area of the industry and what particular skills you want to develop in order to improve the quality of life for yourself and for others in the process of what you do with the tourism industry. Thank you very much. Now, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to.
Eddie, thank you very much. And we're going to have some people signing off here. But if anybody wants to stay and ask a question, you're most welcome. But thank you, Eddie, and nice to talk to you.
Hi, Eddie. This is Radesh. I'm the Dean of the Clements Wilson School. I'm so glad I stayed for this presentation. That was just outstanding. Thank you very much for it. I do have a question. I mean, this city does have a feel of Milan. And so I don't know if you would agree with that, but it's beautiful. I love what you did. And I totally agree that destination marketing can create. I'm thinking about New Zealand with 100% pure, their advertising that took them with Lord of the Rings and so on. But the question I had is about Northern Ireland. So with Brexit and with the backstop and border issues, do you see any of that having impact on tourism there?
Well, undoubtedly it will, because if you start to introduce a land border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, then we're going back to some very bad old days, which no one in Northern Ireland wants and no one in the Republic of Ireland wants.
Right.
And it would seem that given that the European Union has said that there will be no obstacle to Northern Ireland joining the European Union if it wants to, and given that the majority of people in Northern Ireland voted to stay, and the Republic of Ireland is already a member, there are some issues that are going to be asked about why don't you just simply have both parts of Ireland as members of the European Union, and how would you make that happen? That raises questions for Britain and the integrity of the United Kingdom. And with the problem that in Scotland, where they're talking about independence for Scotland, then there will be an attempt by Britain to retain Northern Ireland simply because of the pressures coming from Scotland at the moment. So
Right.
that whole debate is going to run, but it's going to run a lot faster than people thought it was going to, because with the withdrawal, Britain is no longer a member of the European Union.
Right.
We may not have an agreement, in fact, with the European Union in terms of a trade agreement, and the issues are, and the optics are not looking particularly good at this point.
Right.
So that's a kind of a long answer to your question, but it's not a simple matter. We've been talking about Ireland and its problems for so many years, but whenever you have a situation where the population have voted for something where both parts of the island are 100% in agreement, that's a first.
Right. Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all rolls out in the next, I don't know, few years, but I do agree that it's a big issue, major issue, both in Scotland and Ireland.
I think a united Ireland is definitely on the cards in our lifetime.
I think it's certainly being talked about more now than ever before. The curious situation I find is the Republic is the most reticent player for a united Ireland in this situation today, which I find utterly remarkable. And